Well, the weather's improved, the time has come, we're going to fix the paint on the bonnet of the GTO because that is the most pressing thing that we need to do before we go to the Nürburgring. Unfortunately, I'm not on my own for this one because I've drafted in some help. Nürburgring! So yes, it's finally time to deal with the paint, and I have enlisted some help from John. He is over from Mad Scientist Garage, come all the way over from Iowa this morning, picked him up at the airport, and now I'm putting him to work with the last 3 or 4 hours of daylight we have in order to finally fix this paint. That said, whilst he's been diligently shaking it, we do need to give this a clean because there are a lot of birds around here and this has been stood for about 3 weeks without getting anything on it. So we'll get this washed down, and we're also going to remove these black vents because as much as having some extra ventilation whilst we're on track would be really good given how hot this engine gets and stays, they look really, really tatty. And unfortunately, people have been kicked off the Nürburgring for having cars that look less than roadworthy, and a lot of peeling paint from this plasti dip that went on generally makes the car look just a little bit neglected, and we need to fix that before we get anywhere near it. I mean, I guess we could paint it in a hedge if we run out of time, but we'll try our best for now.
Good luck, I'll be at the pub.
Now, to get these vents off is mercifully simple. Not only that, we actually have the original mounting hardware on these ones as well. It's just 5 10mm bolts. These come off, but we're not going to install these ones immediately because then we just have to mask them off in order to paint the rest of the bonnet. So that will be really dumb. So we're just going to pop these ones off, which I would show you doing, but by the time I put the bonnet up high enough that you can actually see what's happening, they are completely in shade and you can see nothing. So you're just going to have to believe me with how easy these are to take off. He says, not easy to take off.
I don't think I'm kidding anybody when I said at the start of the episode we're finally dealing with the paint. This is definitely an interim solution to get us through this visit to the Nürburgring and basically nothing more. Hopefully though, by the time we're done, you'll see that from a casual glance, this car looks so much better when we're finished.
So that's the bonnet done, at least for now. It's got one coat over it, it's just drying off as the sun goes in and out, so hopefully that will bake off fairly soon once we can close it. But for now we're going to put a little bit of paint on the very front bumper here, and I'm going to paint over this stripe. It's kind of an orangey colour, I don't know if it picks it up on camera. I've seen somewhere they've repainted this black, I've seen somewhere it's just been red, and I've seen somewhere it's faded into this orange, and frankly I much prefer it just blended in red. So that's what we're going to try today, not least because it is the easy option. I'm also going to paint over the logo in red because going around this and masking it off is going to be a nightmare. So we're going to paint over it in red and then do it again afterwards because that is the much, much easier option. And then once we've got the paint on this, we're going to give the back of the car a clean down, sort out the wing mirrors, and generally just tart it up a little bit more.
I'd also like to take a second just to apologise for the sound on this video. We had to use the internal mic on the camera because the wireless ones just packed up and we didn't have time to sort them out before we left the next day.
Now when I did the doors and the wings last time, I deliberately avoided doing these because they are plastic and I wasn't sure how they were going to react. So I did some tests on the other side, and you can actually just use some 800 grit and do this much like you would any other piece of metal and take it back very, very slowly and very, very carefully, because being plastic, it's a lot softer, you're going to leave scratches in it way, way easier. But even if I just go over here, and admittedly I should probably be doing this with wet and dry, rather than dry, wet and dry, you can see how it is starting to come up very, very slowly. I'll just put some water on this from John with the, there we go. You can see how it starts to come up much, much better. And that's not just because we've made the paint wet. Even when we dry it back off again, which I just lost the towel, it looks significantly better. Now because this is still going to fade again anyway, I am still going to hit this with some paint. I might also put some lacquer on it as well, but ultimately, in the short term, a little bit of paint on this will be absolutely perfect for what we need. So that's the bonnet basically dry. We can put this down, hopefully without jamming my fingers, and you can see why these lumps actually exist. These are the top mounts, and these stick up about an inch above the sheet metal that forms the bonnet. So they have to have a lump which sits on the top like that. Now, obviously these need to be screwed in from the bottom. These ones just have 5 screws, and we'll bolt these on exactly the same as we did the others. Now, I would be both insane and a phenomenal liar if I told you that this paint job was now perfect. It is not. There is still a huge amount of work that needs to go into this to get it looking good. It needs flattening back again, it needs some touch-up spots for a couple of extra bits of paint here and there. The rest of it kind of needs all pulling together and then lacquering, but for the purpose of does this look car neglected, this is absolutely mint. And with the front of the car so expertly taken care of, we're going to try and do the spoiler while it dries using the last bit of light that we have today. And with the lacquer on, that is about the last thing we can get done before the sun goes down. We've just got to pack up the tools, get everything loaded, and tomorrow we'll be on our way to the Nürburgring. So we made it to the ring, and it is wet. It is wet and miserable, and it's been raining most of the day. We're hoping we're going to get out fairly soon, get a couple of laps in, and just see what it's like. The track wasn't open during the day. It was open from, well, it will be opening from about 5:15. So we're just in the overflow car park at the moment, getting the car warmed up, and we will see how we do. Hopefully, it's going to be a good weekend of tracking. The car itself is running brilliantly. We've got no issues that we can tell at all. I've been giving it some enthusiastic driving on the way over here, and I've previously been quite enthusiastic before it passed the MOT, or rather last year before the MOT expired, and it's given me no concerns, so I am pretty happy with it the way it stands. So all being well, in about half an hour we'll get out on track, do a couple of laps and see where we're at.
Now, for reasons that I'm hoping are fairly self-evident, I'm not going to be putting a timer upon this lap. It's just far too wet, it's not worth it, there's no point, and frankly, it would just be laughable anyway.
Oh, it's moist then.
People might say, well, what was the point in even going out given the weather is like this? And that's probably a reasonable thing if all you want to do is go fast, or you've been there fairly recently. I haven't been to the Nürburgring for something like 7 or 8 years at this point, and I'm just trying to get a feel for the track again. Going slow is exactly what I want to be doing. I need to find my brake points, my turn-in points, my apexes, my out points, all of these things in addition to new tarmac, any changes to the road surface that has resulted from that change in tarmac, among a whole host of other things to just refresh my memory of the track. Although the rain's not coming down particularly heavily, you can see from this BMW in front just how much water is actually on the surface. His tyre tracks are very, very obviously visible. And there's also something that I never thought was going to happen on this lap about to occur.
Thank you button.
Yes, that's right. On a very slow lap, we actually still overtook somebody who was also probably just as concerned about the conditions as we were. That said, we were probably slightly better equipped for it, being a four-wheel drive rather than a rear-wheel drive. Now is as good a time as any to remind you, if you're on track and you have a fixed GoPro mount which is running with the car, to turn off stabilisation. I forgot, and as a result, as we come through Huaishan, you'll see it start to pitch, roll and pan through the corners fairly badly. Unfortunately, pretty much all of the video in car from this trip is done with stabilisation on, so for this one, we're pretty much going to have to put up with it. But if you're on track and you've got your GoPro mounted somewhere firmly, make sure you turn stabilization off so you get a nice natural run through level to the car. Throughout this lap so far, you'll notice I've been fairly gentle on the accelerator and the brakes, and that's not just because I want to take it slow and go around. This is actually the second lap. We didn't record the first one, and on that lap we noticed some fairly significant vibrations through the steering wheel under braking. We thought that the rotors had warped and they just weren't up to the job. But this is the upgraded brake setup on this car with vented discs, so you would think with the relatively slow speeds overall, the weather being wet and cold, they would be okay. No problem, there is somebody in Nürburg or nearby that sells discs and pads, special brakes, and they sometimes carry obscure things, so maybe we'll get lucky and we can put some new discs on it. After all, we've got all the tools with us, so this wouldn't be the biggest problem to deal with. After backing off and what felt like coasting around the rest of the lap, we did our normal cool-down run parallel to the main straight just down from the Devil's Diner and the ticket office. Turning around near the ED Tank Stella garage, driving back up towards the car park to have a look at the damage, the vibrations completely went away. Everything was back to normal, suggesting that the discs were fine and it actually might have been the pads. So, we set out on a second lap, which is the one you're watching at the moment, to see if we could coast it round even more gently and see how long we could make these pads last, because obviously we're in the rain at the moment and it doesn't matter if we're going slowly. If we can get a reasonable run through a whole lap in the wet, that will be a great success for the day. That rattle you just heard as we came down to Versifen is exactly the problem. That is the steering being rattled almost out of my hands under comparatively gentle braking, roughly 5.5 minutes after we set out on this lap. Just before we started this lap, when we were in the overflow car park once again, we went over and looked around the car, checked all of the discs to see if there were any obvious deposits, any obvious damage, cracks, anything of that nature that might be causing this kind of vibration. We ruled out most things because this is something that happens after a period of time, so it's not going to be something like a cracked or warped disc, because it's something that goes away once the disc cools back down again. On that basis, this must be a pad or fluid problem. Potentially something somewhere is boiling, and that's what's causing the pressure to be lifted back off and the uneven braking to rattle the steering wheel. Either way, this is not good. Just tickling the brakes really gently is horrible because it makes them vibrate, but it doesn't put anywhere near as much heat into them so they don't get horrendously bad. Now, the fact that it's raining and the car isn't performing up to really what we'd like isn't going to stop us having fun. We're definitely going to keep doing laps. We just have to be mindful of what the car is currently capable of and try and work out what the problem is. And I'm sure some of you are watching this are screaming into the monitor what is an obvious solution to this problem. I'm going to wait until we get towards the end of this lap to go over what I think the problem is, with the benefit of hindsight and having watched this video and really sat and thought about it for a good deal of time. For the purpose of this weekend, though, we did have another car. We had a VW Passat 2-litre TDI, which I'm going to do a video about those laps and more of the ones in the GTO in a road trip episode coming up soon. For now, though, we're going to continue following this lap all the way to the finish, not least because I'd feel a little bit guilty if I took you all the way through this lap and then cut it off before we got to some of the most interesting sections with Carousel and Brunchen.
When the cameraman waves.
Yeah. Paid for the track, I will use the track.
Yeah. So that's where we parked up the other day, yeah?
Yep. That's Brunchen.
I won't lie, I was pretty glad to get through Brunchen without any incident. Too many people have gone off here, lots of them go over the curbs when it's wet, and they end up going into the barriers, or if they're lucky, just skidding along the grass and bruising their ego, if not their car. The whole section of track from Carousel right the way round to this point is extremely hard on the brakes. I and many other people call it the third gear section just because you never seem to change out of third gear throughout it. It's just hard on the brakes, hard on the accelerator, hard on the brakes, hard on the accelerator, all the way through until you basically get beyond Brunchen, so I was quite pleased to get past it, as I say, all in one piece. So what do I think caused the problem? Well, at the time I was pretty sure it was pads, but the more I watch this back and the more I think it over, I'm pretty certain it has to be brake fluid. It's probably absorbed a whole bunch of water whilst it's been stood around for a few years, through the atmosphere, and now it's just trying to boil its way out of the system, which would explain a few other things as well.
So if I push through the pedal, it stops vibrating as much, because it's just holding everything together.
Yeah.
You might be sitting there watching this saying, you should have checked this before you came to the track, and yes, you're absolutely right. But on further inspection when we got home, we discovered that the brake bleed valves were almost completely seized, and we would have almost certainly either snapped one trying to bleed the brakes, or made it even worse and then not got to the track at all. As it stands, we definitely got lucky. You and I in the future should definitely check your brake fluid more often, especially if you're going to go somewhere like a track where it's going to be used much harder than it would be on the road, especially if it's been stood around for a couple of years. Thanks very much for watching. This has been a much longer episode working on the car, what with having an entire slow lap of the Nürburgring in. Subscribe if you haven't already. We will be doing another video with more track time and also something to try and fix the brakes on this car. Don't forget you can check out shop.pedalbox.show as well as patreon.com/pedalboxshow to support us, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
It's a 1247.
It's all right.